Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Amy Ju. I'm a member of the Anti-Bullying Committee, and I'll be your host tonight, along with Pam Stenberg. On behalf of the committee, I want to thank everyone for coming. And this is just a photograph of all of our committee members and our quick Zoom housekeeping items. Next slide, Pam.
Yeah.
We will be recording today's session. You will find it on the PSC website and on the YouTube channel within a week's time. Please remain muted if you're not speaking, and use the chat to share useful information with one another. If you have a technical question, you could also drop it in the chat, and myself, Jeanette, or Angela will be able to answer those technical questions. We will take all Q&A at the end of the presentation. So when the time comes, please use your Zoom raise hand and we will call out the stack. If you would like to ask a private or a confidential question where you don't want your name disclosed to the audience members, feel free to private message Pam and she will read out your question during the Q&A. Next slide. So before we begin, I'm just going to remind everyone and review our PSC community norms and practices. These norms and practices help to guide our interactions with one another, and they were adopted by the PSC Executive Council in July of 2021. Respect for everyone's worth is fundamental to a university, and particularly to CUNY, which was founded on principles of inclusion. We commit ourselves to nurture a work environment that honors the dignity of all, is respectful and free from discrimination, harassment, or bullying. And we therefore agree to respect each other's differences and to create a healthy, safe, and rewarding environment that nurtures, challenges, and supports the community. In order for our community to function in this way, it is useful for its individual members to make the following commitments. 1, I commit to conduct that is mutually respectful and not discriminatory, harassing, bullying, or threatening. 2, I take responsibility for my actions and my personal perspectives, recognizing that there may be disagreements with others. 3, I will respect everyone's contributions and honor the roles and responsibilities of all members through my words and actions. 4, I will be mindful and reflect on how I might be using or misusing my power and privilege in my interactions. 5, I will intend to be inclusive and support others with the same respect and compassion that I want for myself. 6, I am willing to be an active ally and upstander by speaking, intervening, or acting on behalf of a person being attacked or bullied. 7, I will seek to understand others and assume best intentions in all interactions. 8, I will seek to understand other perspectives and avoid making assumptions. 9, I commit to listen actively and with compassion at the workplace and in all union meetings. So introducing our speaker tonight is Pam Stenberg. She's a professor of English at City College and Hostos Community College. She's also the vice chapter chair for the City College chapter. Pam is also on the PSC Executive Council and the bargaining team and a member of the Anti-Bullying Committee. Fun fact about Pam, one of her favorite quotes is by Laverne Cox, and Laverne Cox has said, "Each and every one of us has the capacity to be an oppressor. I want to encourage each and every one of us to interrogate how we might be an oppressor and how we might be able to become liberators for ourselves and for each other." Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Pam. Take it away.
Great. Thanks. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. So hi, I'm Pam Stenberg. And as Amy said, thanks so much, Amy, for running the intro to this meeting. I am at City College and I'm at Hostos. I've been a member of the Anti-Bullying Committee since pretty much it started. And we want to address all of the issues of bullying on our campuses as best we can, but we also want to create a safe and dignified workplace for all of us, no matter what position we hold in the college. When we decided to do the microaggressions, I think, it's been a conversation that we've had about behavior that doesn't necessarily always rise to what we would consider bullying. But there are things that we just kind of let pass in our daily lives, and they happen so often, they wind up being bullying. So, there are little things here and there. So we definitely wanted to deal with this topic. So the first thing is, we want to, the summary of this particular program will be, discusses daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether they're intentional or unintentional, and they communicate hostile, derogatory, and negative insults to a target person or group of persons under the wider category of microaggressions. Often abilities are underestimated, gender, ethnic, and racial inequalities are stated, inappropriate comments are made regarding mundane tasks with the extent to include, marginalize, or bully others. With the intent to exclude. Solutions for dealing with microaggressions, encouraging open communication are provided. So we'll talk about the spectrum. We'll go from what they are to how we can counter some of this behavior. So one of the things we'll do is to create awareness surrounding common occurrences of microaggressions, explore the outcomes associated with the experience of microaggressions, discover techniques to minimize the occurrence of microaggressions and ways to respond when somebody has been microaggressive. And we'll talk about maybe our own experiences. Hold on. Okay, so what are they? They're everyday indignities. They're things that happen to us in the hallway when we're passing by. I mean, there's all kinds of little things that kind of, there's a phrase that I like to use, which is nibbled to death by guppies. When things are, when there's so many little tiny things that are happening, they become overwhelming. So we'll look at unintentional or insidious bias, and they're really very harmful because the person who's committing them doesn't know it's happening, and the person who's on the receiving end or the target feels it's winds up questioning themselves, like, well, was that an insult? Did they actually mean what they just said? So we're going to look at a brief video first, and we'll talk about racism and how that really plays into microaggressions, how bias plays into microaggressions. So let's watch this and let me know if you can't hear it.
When racial tensions
Can you hear that
on
now?
campus have
Yes.
led to protests
Good,
and
okay.
high-profile resignations. Special correspondent Charlene Hunter-Gault sat down with Columbia University Teachers College professor Daryl Sue to learn more about the small slights that some say are more insidious than the overt racial tensions that could be seen and observed by all. Here's that conversation.
Professor Sue, thank you for joining us. So tell me, just what exactly is microaggression?
Well, microaggressions are varying from being conscious, deliberate on a continuum to being outside one's level of awareness and unintentional. Microaggressions really are reflections of worldviews of inclusion, exclusion, superiority, inferiority, and they come out in ways that are outside the level of conscious awareness of an individual. When I'm asked, where were you born? And I say, I was born in Portland, Oregon, and they persist by saying, no, 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 where were you really born? And I'll say, Portland, Oregon? And they'll say, no, what country were you born in? And I'll say, the United States. They get very embarrassed. Now, this is an example that they are intending to make a personal connection, But the hidden communication, the true worldview, is that I am a perpetual alien or foreigner in my country. I am not a true American, because true Americans only look the following way. And that's what generates these behaviors that are microaggressions.
But you describe it as unintentional, and yet we've seen at the University of Missouri very blatant examples of racism.
You're right about that. Microaggressions vary from being conscious, deliberate, intentional, from old-fashioned racism and bias statements to the unintended consequences. And our studies do indicate that it's the hidden, unintentional forms of bias that are most damaging to people of color. And that, like at the University of Missouri, where you have people being called racial epithets or behaviors that are going on, it actually is only the tip of the iceberg. The reason why I believe students of color, faculty of color, are reacting in such a major way is that they are experiencing a climate that is hostile, that is full of microaggressions. These hate incidents on campus are triggering off this discontent, pain, and feeling of being silenced.
But there are critics of your studies and the notion even of microaggression, which they say have morphed from 1970, when it was unintentional, to now everything that happens, and that people are just being overly sensitive. They say if you coddle these students on campus, how does that prepare them to live in the real world?
You know, the problem is that people believe microaggressions are very similar to the everyday incivility and rudeness that individuals, white Americans, experience in their day-to-day lives. They are quite different. Microaggressions for people of color are constant, continual, and cumulative. They occur to people of color from the moment of birth to when they die. And as a result, any one microaggression in isolation may represent the feather that breaks the camel's back. And people who don't see the lived experience of people of color and the daily onslaught that they experience tend not to believe that it's a major event.
You know, there's another criticism because this has been called, some of the things that people are called, now they say the N-word and other things like that, is hate speech, and it's protected by the First Amendment. So isn't that okay, given that kind of reasoning?
You know, and I think that people who say that we are preventing individuals from free speech don't realize, ironically, that it is people of color that historically have not been able to express themselves openly or freely without punitive actions being directed at them. And so there has to be this balance, but at the same time an understanding that there are limits to free speech when it harms and hurts people.
Why do you think that students commit microaggressions, or adults for that matter?
You know, that's a good question, and I think it goes to the heart of the matter, that none of us are immune from inheriting the racial biases of our forebears. We have, attitudes and biases that are delivered through microaggressions.
But when some of these microaggressions come out in the form of real hatred, is that solvable?
We can deal with that deliberately, but the subtle forms of microaggressions are hard to prove, hard to quantify in some way, and very difficult for us to take actions against, because people oftentimes don't perceive it as harmful and significant. You know, people oftentimes tell me that white Americans are the enemy. I say, no, white Americans aren't the enemy. White supremacy is. It's the social conditioning of the superiority of one group over another. And many white Americans are equally victimized because they have been socialized into a society that tends to imbue them with these images that they believe in, but it's no fault of their own. If you really reach white Americans, they can become valuable allies. One of the reasons why our research concentrates on the unintentional forms of microaggressions is very much what Maya Angelou said. It's the unintentional bias that does the greatest harm to people of color. And I oftentimes use the example that, you know, when you look at the disparities and inequities we have in education, employment, and healthcare, it is not due to the overt racists or the white supremacists. It is due to the well-intentioned teachers who educate our children, employers who decide who to hire, who to retain, and who to promote. And it is those individuals who are unaware of their hidden biases that are having the major impact on our standard of living.
Well, Professor Sue, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
And you can find more about microaggressions, including a video made by Professor Sue explaining how they have impacted his life, on the Race Matters section of our website.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go through the definitions. Brief microaggression is brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, nonverbal, and or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of underrepresented communities and or people perceived to hold less power. So we can see how that applies to our academic structure. The structural and systemic arrangements that validate the interests, positions of a dominant group over non-dominant groups. This structure provides a foundation that justifies institutional oppression from which microaggressions are able to persist. You know, when I read that, I feel the weight of it. And in our everyday environment, I feel the weight of that. So how do we recognize microaggressions? So here's some examples, like asking an Asian American, the example we just had, where are you really from? Commenting to an African American, you are so articulate. Stating, I'm not a racist, I have several Black friends. Mistaking a minority person for a service worker. And stating that campus buildings are named after white males or people on TV shows that feature white people. So what are three common types of microaggressions? We have micro assaults, which are, you know, more behavioral and more overt, micro insults, and micro invalidations. So micro assaults are explicit derogations characterized primarily by a violent, verbal, nonverbal, or environmental attack to hurt the intended target through name calling, avoidant behavior, or purposeful discriminatory actions, right? Conscious, intentional discriminatory actions. So using racial epithets, right? That's right up there. Displaying white supremacist symbols, swastikas, displaying the hood of the Ku Klux Klan, refusing service to sexual minorities, discouraging interracial reactions. These are your very, you know, these seem to be examples of more overt behavior. Micro insults, verbal, nonverbal, and environmental communications that subtly convey rudeness and insensitivity that demean a person's racial heritage or identity. Usually it's not intentional, right? We're thinking of that unconscious bias. These are coming from a place of unconsciousness about the environment these people are in. It's not intentional. Typically occur due to underlying biases and prejudice outside of the person's awareness. So asking an African American or Latino coworker, how did you get your job? That's implying that the person obtained through affirmative action. Micro invalidations. Communications that subtly exclude, negate, or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a targeted person. It's not intentional, again. Typically occur due to underlying biases and prejudice outside of awareness of one's race. White people often ask Latinos where they were born, conveying the message that they are perpetual foreigners in their own lands. Asian American individual who is born and raised in the US is complimented for speaking English well. So micro, in other terms, micro inequity, the pattern of being overlooked, underrespected, and devalued because of one's race or gender. Small events, which are often ephemeral and hard to prove. Events which are covert, often, again, unintentional, frequently unrecognized by the perpetrator. And microaggression is big, systemic forms of oppression rather than interpersonal forms of bias or discrimination. So corporations taking, example is corporations taking advantage of impoverished populations. All right, so what's your experience? So here's a little cartoon. Here's one of those where people are talking over other people. She's female, she's Black. And you can see this is, I don't know if this has ever happened to anyone. It's happened to a lot of people I know. All right, hold on. We were going to take questions at the end, but hold on. So, all right, so at this point, Angela, did you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to say something. So what do you call this kind of aggression? My great grandchildren, very young, one is 7 and one is 6. I was walking with them in Florida, and this Caucasian lady called the cops and said I kidnapped these kids. So what do you call that? I mean, I didn't get into any trouble because my grandkids offended me, my great grand. They was like, no, that's all grandma. So then what do you call that? And it was done to my grandson because his wife is Caucasian. So, I mean, my grandkids, one of them have blonde hair and blue eyes. And I mean, the other one also have blonde hair and brown hair. So, you know, so what do you call that? Is that called microaggression or?
So Angela, let's go through this and then let's come back to that, right? Let's come back to that. Thanks. Right. Okay. So, all right. So we'll get to the impact of microaggressions, and, all of these things have such a deep and lasting impact on us, especially when it's systemic and it happens over and over again. Mm-hmm. It really, all of these things, they make us sick. Ultimately, at the end of the day, bullying makes us sick, but this makes us sick. So it, reinforces and perpetuates oppression. We see it around us. It happens to other people. We take that in, and we may not even be able to discern what's right because of our own bias, right? So we'll talk about a three-part decision-making model, which is, did this microaggression really occur? Should I respond to this microaggression? And how should I respond to this microaggression? If you choose not to confront, you may feel regret, remorse, isolation, guilt, and or shame, right? So, and when on the other side, when you choose to confront, you may feel fear of appearing like a negative representation of the social model. Listen, I'm going to tell you, my representation at times is angry adjunct. I just want to say that. It's like, that's what happens. Of retaliation from the person confronted, and that they choose, and when you choose to confront, you may feel like you're going to choose to be an ineffective method. You're going to choose an ineffective method of communication. So it's like all of these things are going on inside you. If you're going to confront, how am I going to do this? Am I going to do this appropriately? Am I going to get the end that I want? So we talked about it. It hurts and re-traumatizes people who have already experienced depression in the larger world. This can significantly affect one's ability to be present and learn, as they are consumed by their need to take care of their emotions, because they're always being hit with little microaggressions. There's feelings of pain that can accumulate and affect your health and well-being, and possibly retention wherever you are. It erodes trust and credibility established with faculty, staff, or student, and seen as someone who doesn't care about people like me, when it happens. And by not leaning into and examining the situation, we miss learning opportunities for everyone involved. It's difficult to do, but it's worth doing. So what are the psychological consequences? Anxiety, depression, sleep difficulties, diminished confidence, helplessness, loss of drive, intrusive cognitions, i.e. internal dilemma, but also PTSD, right? That's an intrusive cognition, and diminished cognition, because you're so inwardly focused at this point because of the pain, you're not as present as you could be. All right, so how do we respond? We have micro interventions, micro resistance, and micro affirmations. So responding to microaggression with a micro intervention is everyday words or deeds, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicates to the target validation of their experiential reality, value as a person, affirmation of their racial or group identity, support and encourage. Micro resistance is reframing the defense of to the microaggression. So okay. Into proactive focus on the structural nature of the problem, incremental daily efforts to challenge the privilege of the person who's aggressing, and then micro affirmations, acts of kindness that occur wherever people wish to help others succeed, being supportive, validating people, saying, yes, I heard that, I understand that, I see that. So those are all things that we can do for others to respond. And also we can, and building that network, that community of care and of comfort.
There are several ways that you can address verbal microaggressions if they happen. Here are 5 tips on how you can respond if it is said in your presence. These tips are not intended for only those who are the receiver of microaggressions, but for anyone who is present when a microaggression is said. The first tip is to inquire. If someone says something that you think might be a microaggression, ask them to clarify what they meant. This gives an opportunity for the person to clear up any misunderstanding their statement might have caused, and/or puts them on notice that what was said was not okay with you. The next tip is, if somebody says something, you can always reframe what was said. In this way, you offer a different perspective on how what was said might be interpreted. Reframing works really well when people use generalities. Things like, those kids are always blank, or those people are known for blank. When you reframe, you allow someone to have a gentle reminder that using generalities usually leads to a microaggression. Sometimes you just need to call a spade, so you need to identify the microaggression or call it out directly. When you said, "It was offensive, and it made me feel, and this is not okay with me." If something is said that upsets everyone while having a discussion, diffuse the situation by shutting down the conversation and having everyone take a moment to reflect, preferably in writing. Come back to the conversation only after everyone has calmed and you have revisited the norms established for civil discourse. So the last tip is for you to revisit what was said if you missed an opportunity to address a microaggression. I've had so many conversations where people were in spaces and heard things said, and they're always regretting that they didn't say anything. I was in a meeting and someone said this and I felt really bad and I knew I should have said something, but I didn't say it. What I would say to that is it's never too late to go back and address a microaggression. At the end of the day, you are offering an opportunity for someone else to grow, and that has to be a good thing.
Thanks, Amy. So how do you handle them? So explain good intent and explain impact, right? I know you mean well, but that hurts. My favorite one is ask a question. What do you mean? Or what exactly does that mean? And having people be more specific about their intention and what they were thinking. Interrupt and redirect. Let's not go there. Broaden to universal behavior. I think that applies to everyone. Or making it individual. Are you speaking of someone in particular and saying, ouch, ouch, wow, that hurt? Or, something, so, depending on the situation. So I think it's important that we're armed with ways to address it beforehand, because sometimes the shock of a microaggression can kind of derail us emotionally, and we may not say anything. So I think it's important to kind of know what kinds of things you can say. So next slide, Amy. So you want, as we said before, you want to have an opportunity to educate the offender. As we've said, many microaggressions are just unintentional, thoughtless behavior. So one way to do that is to appeal to the offender's values and principles. Is that how you really feel? Differentiate, as we said before, between intent and impact. I know you didn't intend to, but I was very hurt by that. Or I know you didn't intend to, but I found that I found that to be offensive. So encourage empathy and collaboration. Right. A lot of these things occur. A lot of these interactions occur in spaces where we're actually in community with other people. So we have to assume that they want to interact with us. So encourage empathy from the other person, and collaboration. Hey, I know you didn't intend this. How can we address this issue? Describe the benefits of workplace diversity. Yeah. There are many of them, and that would be, one way to address education for the offender. So institute long-term mandated training on cultural sensitivity for everyone. That's something we would want CUNY to do. Infuse multicultural principles into organization mission and values eventually. Identified shared mutual goals for everyone, working together to get somewhere. Increase communities' exposure to positive examples of diverse cultures, and or address directly the stereotypes that people have. I mean, we need to be honest and say, bias exists because there are stereotypes, and I think addressing it is really important. So setting up a buddy system, and reporting inequitable practices to the union. when it's, when we have a grievance. I think that's really the place to start. So next slide. Great. So bullies engage in intimidating behavior that's often covert and hard to detect, but bullying happens constantly, right? The difference between like just a microaggression and bullying is that bullying is a process over a period of time. So they misuse, when we were talking about power, right? They misuse their influence and power to manipulate others into following their lead. This can be done through microaggressive behaviors, by isolating other opposing voices and leaving others out. So we have to, we really have to think when this behavior, is this behavior constant? Is it happening over and over? Is it isolating me? Am I being put in a position of isolation? All of these things, is this bullying or is it just microaggression? And are they just completely unconscious about their bias? So both have negative impact on individuals, workplace climate, and entire organization, whether it's bullying or covert or overt behavior. So, we're talking about like verbally abusive conduct, threatening or humiliating, and can both sabotage and can sabotage by interfering with one's job. So, and it all creates a very hostile, offensive, and toxic workplace. That's the question. Is this a toxic workplace, and why is it a toxic workplace, right? And we need to be objective in when we can step back and look at it and say, wait a minute, this isn't working. And why is it not working? Oh, because it's hostile and there's a lot of bias and offensive behavior here. So early warning signs of microaggressions within a bullying context, right? Goading. The bully embarks on an intentionally negative, aggressive, or rude actions, or communicates in a way to provoke a reaction from the target. And then the bully would use that instantly or in the future to procure a disentitlement or disciplinary action. It's provocative behavior or provocative communication. So that's one way with microaggressions. Gaslighting. The bully seeks to manipulate the target by making them doubt themselves, their sense of reality, or other capabilities. I mean, it's always, if you can, check and say, did I just hear that? If there's someone in the room with you, just is this accurate? Trust your own instincts, but if there's someone else there, you can ask. In essence, the bully seeks to impose a distorted sense of reality onto the victim and to affect negatively their mental state. So we were talking about DARVO, which is deny, attack, reverse, victim, and oppressor, right? So this is the bully denies its bullying tactics and depicts the target as oversensitive, uncooperative, and willing to misinterpret simple administrative errors and to unnecessarily burden staff with their persisting complaints and communications. So, the victim, the oppressor becomes the victim. And that can be done with microaggressions. Again, isolating, as I was saying before, the bully isolates the victims from groups, teams, research networks, meeting, academic events. They're specifically or unintentionally left out, and this is in a department or a faculty or a lab. And then discrediting and defaming the victim, right? That's again, warning signs of microaggressions. Bully embarks upon a clear dignity attacks on the victim by criticizing their conduct or their performance at work. The bully knowingly and willfully makes false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements or allegations, and that's kind of the highest level. Amy, next. Right. So, when we're looking at microaggressions versus bullying, so with remove microaggressions, one of the ways to do it is, active listening between you and the person who said those biased statements, communicate effectively. In a microaggression space, when it's unintentional, we should be able to communicate clearly the impact of the person's communication or behavior on us, and with hopefully without a more charged interaction. Learn to interact, remove microaggressions, learn to interact with people different than you. This is for obviously the person who's committing the microaggressions, and to be open to discussing your own bias, right, against one particular group or another, or how bias is impacting you, especially when it's unconscious. And then being an ally and standing against bias. And these are really important aspects of trying to overcome microaggressions. So bullying, right? To remove bullying, we need to recognize it. We need to know that it's not about the victim, but it's about the bully. Need to think through options and take actions. And we have a whole other presentation on how to look at the bullying situation and how to think through objectively and try to discern what it is you need to do. For bullying also is gather a log of negative actions, make sure to write everything down, and then evaluate, review employee handbook, and collaborate. Next, Amy. So here is a graphic on conceptual model of hierarchical microaggressions in higher education settings. And I really like this one because it talks about the structure, the politics, the symbolic frame, and how all of these things interact with each other in the hierarchy of higher ed, which we have our own micro environments. So we the insult, the hierarchical microaggression, insult, devalue, exclude, and many of us feel that, treat differently, micromanage, all of those things. And this is the hierarchical microaggression. And then we look at the framework. It's like based on position and institutional policies. And yeah, I have a long conversation about institutional policies, things that are written into the books that exclude faculty. Symbolic frame, which is tradition, value, mission, and really the symbolic frame is the way, the way we think about our culture of higher ed. Political frame and limited resources, and power, and the perpetrator's positional power. Again, we come back to power and politics, and then human resource frame in the name of mentoring. So, and then you look at the edges, right? It's gender, race, ethnicity, disability, and sexual orientation. All of those things are connected around the hierarchical microaggression of the institution. And all of it is, much of it these days is like, well, we have to cut funding, and so therefore certain groups will suffer greater than other groups. And there's, it's just a huge amount of aggression towards particularly vulnerable groups. And, whether it's race or gender or class, which, gives us a toxic workplace culture, which has increased stress, physical and mental health issues, low job satisfaction, burnout, decreased productivity, and people leave the institution. After they've been here long enough, they're like, I don't want to do this. And it means, financial loss. So, sometimes these cost saving measures cost more in the in the greater picture. Amy? So you want to move on to that? So getting rid of microaggressions, individuals. So we need to recognize that dismissive attitudes are harmful. We need to engage in self-reflection to identify times that you may have been microaggressive in your personal and work life. We need to participate in continuing education activities like this about bias and microaggressions. And we need to avoid making assumptions and labeling individuals. We want to do that so desperately because there's so little time and our brains just want to snap to and, make an assumption and label someone, by their class, by their title, by their color, by their gender. So the institutions, our institutions, need to foster inclusive and supportive environments. We need to collaborate with groups and organizations who are committed to addressing issues of diversity and inclusion. And we need to the institution needs to offer trainings and opportunities for continuing education and diversity workshops. We need all these things. Amy? And if you supervise or in that position, so recognize that microaggressions occur on a daily basis. So foster an environment that discusses this openly. It's, we have to start where we are, right? We need to start where we are. We can't start with, well, we're just going to pretend it's not happening, or we're better than that, or whatever it is. We need to start where we are. Yes, we have, microaggressions on a daily basis. We need to talk about it. We need to say, oh, this happened. Oh, okay. Just be honest. And that's really hard because we get ashamed and we feel singled out. I mean, all of these things. So if a supervisee sees that supervisors have expressed microaggression, they need to approach the supervisor and acknowledge the action. Next. Allies. Right. It's so important to be an ally. When microaggressions happen, be an ally that cares, right? Cares is consider how what one said was harmful, to yourself, consider how that was harmful. Be accountable for your actions and willing to apologize. Be open, right? Rethink harmful assumptions or stereotypes. Look at your own bias. Empathize with those on the receiving end of microaggressions, right? And validate people. It's really, really, really important to validate that what they experienced was accurate, right? If you saw something, you can say to somebody, hey, that wasn't right. Even if they don't acknowledge it. I've done that. I mean, I've said, wow, that was terrible. Or wow, how do you feel? And people have said that to me. Like, things have happened where they've come up to me and said, wow, I really feel bad. Are you okay? That's been amazing because it makes me, it gives me the space to acknowledge that maybe what happened to me wasn't okay. And then support by offering resources and asking how you can help. I mean, it's really, all of these things are really important. So let's look at the medical school example. So, all right. So do we want to divide into groups? Amy, what do we want to do?
We could divide into groups, or we could have a large group participation.
We have 60 people. I think, can we do breakout rooms? Do you have breakout rooms?
How many rooms do we want?
If we have 60, I don't know. Let's do 5 breakout rooms.
5? Okay. And
Okay.
automatically assign, or let people choose?
Yeah, automatically, and then it'll just assign people.
Okay.
So here's the scenario, and then we're going to go in and we're going to divide into groups, and different people will play the roles, right? So today is Jennifer Wu's first shift as an emergency medical intern in the emergency department. Her team consists of an EM, emergency medical attending, 3rd-year EM resident, and herself. Her attending, Dr. Smith, asks each member of the team to introduce themselves and share where they are from. Dr. Wu tells them her name and states that she is from Jackson, Mississippi. Dr. Smith said, "You don't sound like you're from Mississippi. Where are you originally from?" Okay, so that's the scenario, and we'll do a little role play in the groups, and then we'll come back and talk about that. Amy, do you want to break
Open
everyone
the-
out?
Yeah, I'll open the rooms now.